The letter had been sitting there for decades, tucked behind a rusted metal drawer in a forgotten sorting room of the Newark Central Post Office. It was discovered only because the building was finally being cleared for renovation. Harold, a postal technician close to retirement, had been pulling apart the old cabinets when a small yellowed envelope slid out and fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. The envelope was addressed in elegant, faded handwriting. No return. Addressed, the ink had bled slightly with time, but one thing was clear. It was dated December 3rd, 1939. The address was somewhere in Brooklyn, but the name on the front, Rachel Lewin, struck Harold as strange. He couldn't explain why. Curious, Harold set the envelope aside and took it home that night. He'd seen a few lost letters in his career, but this one felt different. Something about the age of the paper, the wartime date, and the foreign writing, inside polish, he guessed made it feel like more than just lost mail. The next day, he handed it to a friend at the Historical Society, who passed it to a translator. What they found sent a chill down Harold's spine. Far away in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a woman in her early 50s was arranging books on her shelf. Rachel Ann Lowell, as she was known, lived alone in a modest house filled with second-hand furniture, dusty photo albums, and unanswered questions. She had grown up in St. Agnes's orphanage after being found, abandoned as a toddler at the Newark train station in 1941. No one ever came for her. She'd spent her life chasing fragments, an old silver bracelet with the initials ML, a torn photograph of a young couple in front of what looked like a European cathedral. No one at the orphanage knew who they were. She carried that mystery like a scar on her soul. Then the phone rang. "Miss Lowell, this is Diane Schultz from the Newark Historical Society. We believe we've found something that belongs to you, or rather, something written for you a long time ago." The next day, Rachel walked into the museum room clutching the old bracelet in her purse like a talisman. Diane met her with a mix of professional calm and barely restrained emotion. "I know this will be hard to believe, but this letter was addressed to you, dated 1939, written in Polish by a couple named Jacob and Miriam Lewin." Rachel blinked. Her knees weakened. She sat in silence as Diane placed the envelope before her. Her trembling fingers touched the paper. Even before opening it, something inside her cracked open. "My parents," she whispered. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But the moment her eyes met the graceful script, she knew. Jakub and Miriam. A wave of cold swept over her. The names matched the initials on the bracelet, the faces in the photo. It was as if her entire life had been a puzzle. And now she'd found the corner piece. The letter began, "Our dearest Rachel, we do not know if you will ever read this, but we hope, with all the love in our hearts, that you are safe and well. The world is changing, and we are no longer safe in Poland. We are coming to America under different names. We must keep you hidden. You are our light. Forgive us." Tears rolled down Rachel's cheeks as she read aloud. A quiet sob escaped her chest. She had lived her entire life thinking she was abandoned, but the truth was far more complicated. Her parents had not run from her but for her. That night, Rachel sat by the window of her home, the letter in one hand, the bracelet in the other. She didn't have all the answers, not yet, but the silence that had haunted her for decades had finally spoken, and it carried the voices of love, fear, and sacrifice. And it was only the beginning. December 1939, Gdynia, Poland. The docks were chaotic. War had twisted every familiar corner into uncertainty. Women clutched infants wrapped in blankets, men shouted orders, and the sky above the Baltic Sea churned with a grayness that matched the mood of those who waited. Jakub Lewin, a tall man with weary eyes, held his wife Miriam's hand tightly. She looked much older than her 32 years, her once dark curls now tucked hastily beneath a wool cap. In her arms, she cradled a bundle that didn't move, a baby, swaddled in silence. "She's sleeping," Miriam whispered, as if afraid to speak the words aloud. "Or maybe she just knows what's coming." Jacob glanced behind them. Soldiers moved among the crowd, inspecting papers, barking questions in German and Polish. Their ship, SS Manhattan, a neutral American liner, was preparing to depart. They had fake documents, new names, Jonathan and Maria Levin. Jacob's old life, his job as a mathematics professor. Their house in Warsaw, their wedding photos, was now ashes or rubble. All that remained was Rachel. "We have to leave her," Miriam said, tears streaking down her face. "If they stop us and search, if they find out we're Jews. Jacob nodded. He couldn't speak. They had bribed a Christian neighbor, Auntie Selina, to take the baby to an orphanage in the countryside and leave a note. Please protect this child. Her parents will return. But they never would. 2 weeks later, in New York City, Jacob and Miriam arrived with little more than their coats and a letter they could not send. It was addressed to Rachel, but they had no return address, no orphanage, name, just faith that someday someone would find it. They mailed the letter anyway. They didn't know it would be misdirected, tossed, forgotten behind a drawer for over 50 years. 1941, Newark, New Jersey. In the dead of night, a train from the east slowed to a halt at the Newark Broad Street station. An infant girl was left on the bench, wrapped in a coat far too fine for a poor family. There was no note. A station clerk named Bernard Carter found her crying. He handed her off to the police, who, unable to locate any parents or witnesses, gave her the name Rachel Allen. After the train car, she was found near Dot. No one connected the abandoned baby with the missing Polish couple who had disappeared into the flood of immigrants just 2 years before. Back to 1990, Rachel held the letter as she sat with Diane, her fingers running over each line again and again. There was a second sheet tucked inside a photograph, slightly damaged. It showed a man and a woman in front of a crumbling European building. Behind them stood a wooden sign that read, Gdynia Dockyard Authority. I think this is the only photo of them that still exists, Diane said gently. Rachel nodded. They're younger than I imagined, but I can feel it. That's them. Would you consider doing a DNA test? Diane asked. There may be records. There may be living relatives. Rachel stared at the photo. For most of her life, her identity had been a blank space. Now, slowly, the picture was filling in. She whispered the names again, as if they were a prayer. Jacob, Miriam. For the first time, she felt real. June 1940, Warsaw countryside. Poland. In a quiet village just outside Warsaw, life trudged on under the heavy boots of the German occupation. But tucked away in a modest house near the forest edge, an elderly woman named Selina Bukowska kept a secret wrapped in linens and lullabies. The child, Rachel, now just over 1 year old, had been brought to her in the dead of night by the Lewins, whose pale faces and trembling voices still haunted her dreams. Selina, a Catholic widow with no children of her own, had agreed reluctantly and out of guilt to protect the baby. She placed Rachel in a wicker crib once meant for a child, who never came, and whispered prayers over her each night. Outside, whispers of partisans, disappearances, and Nazi informants filled the air. Selina pretended to be deaf to them. Her neighbors assumed the girl was a distant relative, maybe a war orphan passed off to her by nuns. No one asked too many questions, and Selina gave no answers. She kept the note the Lewins had written, hidden beneath the floorboard under her bed. She reread it often, especially when Rachel cried in her sleep. To whoever finds this child, her name is Rachel Lewin. She is the daughter of Jacob and Miriam Lewin of Warsaw. We are fleeing the war. Please, protect her until we return. But she knew they were not coming back. No one came back anymore. 1945, end of the war. By the time the war ended, Rachel was nearly 6. The world outside had changed again. Soviet tanks had replaced Nazi patrols, and fear had taken a new uniform. Selina was older now, slower but fiercely protective. She told Rachel fairy tales at night, some real, some invented. She called her Zozia, a safer name. Rachel sounded too Jewish, too dangerous, even now. But she saved the original documents in a tin box lined with cloth, along with the photo Jacob had handed her in secret, one of him and Miriam on their wedding day. When soldiers came knocking one day, asking about hidden children, Selina stood tall in her doorway and offered them stale bread and vodka. They never questioned the girl playing with wildflowers in the yard. But Selina's health declined, and one morning in 1951, she passed away in her sleep. The local authorities sent Rachel now to a state orphanage near D.E. The documents were never found. The tin box was tossed with her belongings. Rachel became Zofia Bukowska, an orphan with no known past. Back to 1990, New Jersey. Rachel sipped tea across from Diane, her hands shaking slightly. She saved me, she whispered. Selina, she risked everything. She did. Diane nodded. And thanks to her, we may be able to trace the rest. Rachel unfolded the photo of the woman and child in front of the cottagery. From a separate envelope, sent anonymously, It had come from a historian in Poland, researching local war records. The woman in the photo was confirmed to be Selina. The child, curly-haired and bright, matched Rachel's own baby pictures from the orphanage. Rachel's voice cracked. "I didn't know I was loved. You were," Diane said, even when the world was crumbling. Warsaw, Poland, 1990. Diane arrived in Warsaw weeks after her initial discovery, carrying Rachel's story in her heart and a folder of letters in her bag. Her mission was personal now. She wanted to find proof, something physical, that would close the wound Rachel had carried for 5 decades. With the help of a local historian, Tomasz Salivski, Diane traced the house where Selina Bukowska had lived during the war. It had since become an abandoned structure on the outskirts of a forgotten village, half swallowed by creeping ivy and crumbling from years of neglect. The air was heavy with damp earth and echoes. Inside, time had folded. A tarnished crucifix still hung on the wall. A lace curtain fluttered at the cracked window. Dust clung to everything. But the most shocking discovery was what Diane found. Under the floorboard right, where Selina's note had said . It was a tin box, just as described. Inside, wrapped in yellowed fabric, was the wedding photo of Jacob and Miriam Lewin, along with a small knit hat labeled Rachel and a journal. Selina's handwriting filled the pages in neat, slanted Polish script. Tomasz translated aloud as Diane recorded. "They came in the night. The baby had her mother's cheeks and her father's eyes. I do not know if I am brave or foolish, but I took her. She is mine now. I named her Zosia for safety, but I pray someday someone will call her by her true name again." Diane felt chills crawl up her spine. This wasn't just documentation, it was love in ink, grief soaked into paper. Each entry told of quiet resistance, sleepless nights, the hunger and fear Selina endured just to keep one child hidden from a brutal war. There were moments of beauty. To Rachel's first steps, her first word, Tashek, or little bird, her favorite lullaby. Selina had loved her like her own, perhaps even more so, because every day felt borrowed. The orphanage archives room with Tomasz's help. Diane found the orphanage where Rachel had been sent. The records were barely legible, but there it was: Zofia Bukowska, admitted, February 12, 1951. No mention of her prior name, but inside the file, folded behind a vaccination record, was the same black and white photo of the child with the wild curls. Someone had kept it. A note scrawled in faded pencil read, "Found with elderly woman. No known relatives. Quiet, polite, possible Jewish origin." That was it. The entire documentation of Rachel's early life. A life nearly erased. New Jersey. 1 month later, Helden Helter held the knit cap in her hands, eyes full of tears. "She kept this. She did." Diane whispered, "She never stopped believing you mattered." Rachel pressed the soft wall to her lips, breathing in the ghost of the woman who saved her. And then Diane handed her the diary. "I thought you'd want to read her words." Rachel smiled through the ache in her chest. "I finally found my mother." New Jersey, 1990. 1 week later, Rachel couldn't sleep. The diary sat beside her bed, worn and sacred. Every night she read a few pages. Every night she cried. Each word from Selina unlocked a memory she didn't know she had. The feeling of soft arms wrapping around her during a thunderstorm. A song hummed near a fireplace. The scent of cooked potatoes and warm bread. Selina had been her true mother, even if not by blood. But the weight of the truth came with new questions. Who were her real parents? Why had they risked everything to save her? What happened to them? Diane had answers. While Rachel read the diary, Diane was still digging through archives in Warsaw. Thanks to Selina's careful details, she uncovered a final clue in a Jewish registry from 1939, a record of a marriage between Jacob Lewin and Miriam Karpel, both of listed under children. Rachel Lewin, born March 1940. This wasn't just confirmation, it was a restoration of identity. Rachel had been renamed by the state. She had lived decades as Sophia Ann Bukowska, unaware of the name her parents whispered in the dark before letting her go. Now, Diane returned to New Jersey once more, this time with a printed copy of the Lewins' marriage certificate and birth record. Rachel stared at the name, Rachel Lewin. "I had a name," she whispered. "A real one." "You always did," Diane said gently. "But now the world knows it too." The letter inside the diary. Selina had tucked one final note. A letter she had written but never sent. To Rachel, "If you ever find this, I loved you from the moment I laid eyes on you. I am not your mother by birth, but I was your mother in every heartbeat. Forgive me for keeping the truth so long. I only wanted you safe. If you read this, then you are alive. That's all I ever prayed for. With love eternal, Selina. Rachel folded the letter to her chest. She finally allowed herself to grieve, not only for her parents, but for the woman who had raised her, hidden her, saved her, and for the child she had once been, who never understood why she felt both loved and alone. Later that night, she took out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. To Selina, you were more than my guardian angel. You were my guide through the fire. I found you. I found myself. New Jersey, 1990. Days after the revelation, Rachel stood in front of the mirror, holding the black and white photo Diane had found her parents on their wedding day in 1939. Jacob Lewin wore a simple dark suit. Miriam Karpel, slender and dignified, had eyes full of quiet fear and defiant love. They looked so young, so full of plans, so unaware that history was already sharpening its knife. Rachel ran her fingers along the edge of the photo, then looked at herself. The eyes, the curve of the jaw. There was no doubt she belonged to them. The letter from Krakow thought. Same morning, another envelope arrived, aged and yellowing. The return address was smudged, but Diane recognized it had come from the Krakow Historical Society addressed to her, but inside was something far older. It was a letter, postmarked 1990, but dated 1939, and it had never reached its destination. Inside, in careful polished script, it read, "To whomever finds this, we are and Miriam Lewin. We are fleeing tonight. We leave behind our home, our books, our names, but we take with us our daughter Rachel, who must live. If we do not return, let this letter tell the world. We were here, we were in love, we were real." There was no signature, just a pressed, forget-me-not flower inside. Rachel felt her knees buckle. She had grown up believing she was no one, an orphan, a war shadow. But this letter, fragile as parchment, rewrote her story. Public record. Private grief. That week, Diane helped Rachel submit the documents to Yad Vashem's pages of testimony. Jacob and Miriam Lewin would no longer be nameless victims. Their names would live on in stone and in search engines. Rachel also submitted a statement, her hand shaking as she typed. "My name is Rachel Lewin. My parents were Jacob and Miriam. I survived because of a woman named Selina. I lived because 3 people gave their lives for mine." An unexpected visitor a few days later. While Rachel sat reading in her garden, a man in his 70s knocked at the gate. He held a folder. "You, Rachel?" he asked, a Polish accent lingering in his voice. I am Eric Novak. My mother was Selina's cousin. She told me about you when I was a boy. I've been trying to find you for years." Rachel's breath caught. Eric handed her a faded envelope. "Selina wrote this for you. She gave it to my mother in 1962 and asked that if she ever passed, and if I ever found you, I should give it to you. The second letter, Rachel, I dreamed of your wedding. I dreamed of seeing your first child, but life had other plans. If you were reading this, then I did one thing right. I kept you safe. Live fully, my girl, for all of us who couldn't." Selina Rachel wept into the old man's hands. She was no longer a ghost, no longer a question mark. She had a name, a past, a legacy. Washington, D.C. 1991. A year had passed since the letters arrived, but the impact still rippled through Rachel's days like an unexpected wind. She had since spoken on several panels about Holocaust memory, given testimony to historical societies, and even traveled to Europe to walk the paths her parents once feared to tread. But nothing prepared her for the National Holocaust Memorial ceremony she was invited to attend that spring. At place among the remembered days, Rachel stood in the marble atrium of the new museum. She found herself staring at a wall engraved with thousands of names, families lost, lineages erased. But today, 2 names had just been added, Jacob Lewin and Miriam Karpel Lewin. She stepped forward, eyes brimming, and ran her hand across the fresh engraving. Her name, Rachel Lewin, appeared beside theirs, listed under children known to have survived. The moment was heavy, sacred. Jacob and Miriam had vanished in fear, but now they were remembered in dignity. A story retold later, during the ceremony. Rachel was invited to speak. Her voice, steady but emotional, echoed through the hall. "My parents were not famous. They were not generals or leaders, but they were brave. brave enough to give up everything. For me, they left behind letters, names, stories, and a little girl. Today, I bring them back. Today, their story lives because I lived. Applause rose, not for the speech, but for the survival, for the reclaiming of memory. Home, again back in New Jersey. Rachel finally felt ready to open one last box Selena had left behind. Inside were old toys, drawings she had made as a child, and folded in a silk handkerchief, a second photo, one that must have been taken before the war. Her, as a baby in Jacob's arms, Miriam looking on with pride. It was proof, not of survival but of life, of existence, of joy, however brief. Rachel framed the photo and placed it on her mantle. She now understood. Her life was a mosaic of bravery, of fragments lost and found again. Some stories are almost erased by time, hidden in attics, buried in letters, whispered between generations. But when we der buscar, ouvir, preservar, a história volta. A vida volta. Se essa história te tocou, deixe comentário, curta e se inscreva no canal para mais relatos reais como este. Você pode ajudar a manter viva a memória de quem quase foi esquecido. Qual história você gostaria de ver contada aqui? Compartilhe com a gente nos comentários.